A scandal at USC sparks a cancel culture debate, nationalist conservatives in Europe learn an important lesson about free speech, MSNBC makes the dumbest diversity complaint of all time, and a TikToker explains an issue near and dear to my heart: pretty privilege. Buckle up and get ready to lose some brain cells with me, because all that and more is coming up on today's episode of Bread vs. Everyone, my new daily show where I take on all the craziest things in our politics and on the internet from a center-right independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your thoughts as we go along. And now, without further ado, let's head over to California, where a scandal at USC, the University of Southern California, has just come out that's sparking a pretty interesting debate about free speech and cancel culture. The long and the short of it is basically that a young woman with pretty extreme anti-Israel, pro-Palestine views was named as the valedictorian for the graduating class at USC, but her speech was canceled over pretty nebulous and vague safety concerns because amid a bunch of online backlash about her anti-Israel views. Let's go to some local news coverage from NBC LA.
10 days ago, a valedictorian selected. A biomed major from Chino Hills, Osna Tabassum, was quoted as being grateful. She talked about her extracurricular activities, including sending medical supplies to Ukraine and to earthquake-ravaged Turkey and Syria. But come May 10th, she will not be allowed to speak at graduation due to her past activity on social media. It is a decision celebrated by Trojans for Israel, while the LA chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations condemns it. USC releasing a statement that concludes, "To be clear, this decision has nothing to do with freedom of speech. There is no free speech entitlement to speak at a commencement. The issue here is how to best maintain campus security and safety, period."
I think the valedictorian still should be able to make your speech, right? Yeah.
Tabassum releasing her own statement. As your class valedictorian, I implore my USC classmates to think outside the box, to work towards a world where cries for equality and human dignity are not manipulated to be expressions of hatred.
Of course, whenever there's a controversy over campus free speech, there's really no better source on this issue from the pro-free speech perspective than the one and only Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, which, disclaimer, I do some freelance work for. They put out a statement about this scandal at USC, and here's what they had to say. Of course, no student has the right to be valedictorian. At USC, it's an academic honor USC can give out as an institution sees fit. But once USC has selected a student for this honor, canceling her speech based on criticism of her viewpoint definitely implicates the campus speech climate in important ways. USC is a private university that makes First Amendment-like free speech promises. It's also bound by California's Leonard Law, which requires private secular colleges and universities to give their students the same expressive rights enjoyed by students at the state's public colleges. Implicit in the idea of a campus committed to robust expressive rights is that administrators won't censor their students just because they have controversial views. Here, USC should have been palms up about any genuine security threats, with administrators first doing everything in their power to provide adequate security for the event so it could proceed. Canceling it should be a last resort, and they should avoid at all costs ultimately doing what they've done here and capitulating to a heckler's veto. I do want to shout out the fact that a fair number of voices who are very staunchly pro-Israel, but have also spoken out about campus free speech and against cancel culture and safetyism and all of that, still stuck with those principles and condemn this act of censorship, even though they disagree strongly with the students' views and personally strongly support Israel. The best example of that is Barry Weiss, whose outlet, The Free Press, published a defense of this USC student to not be canceled, even though they strongly disagree with her views on the conflict. And to be clear, I'm coming at this from the perspective of setting the actual debate aside, the substance of the issue, whether you are pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I'm not a geopolitical expert, and I'm not here to tell you what to think about this conflict. But I am somebody who strongly believes in free speech and open inquiry and robust debate, and has condemned campus culture of safetyism and needing to shelter students, and I've also condemned cancel culture. And no matter what you think about the students' views, that is exactly what is happening here. This safety excuse is complete and utter bullshit. USC has literally hosted President Obama on its campus. So if they can figure out Security for Obama, I think they could handle a controversial commencement address and address the security concerns through taking security measures and increasing police presence and that kind of thing, not canceling the speech altogether. Which, guys, like Fire says, caving to that invites future intimidation, right? You're rewarding the mob, you're rewarding the heckler's veto, and you're sending the message that if you just send in some threats, you can silence any speaker you want at USC. I was really disappointed to see that some campus Jewish groups at USC have supported this cancellation attempt and have basically said that, this speech would have made Jewish students uncomfortable and unsafe, and so they're glad to see it canceled. This is so incredibly foolish and short-sighted on their part, because the exact same logic being used to justify this cancel culture event could be used against them or a student with their views to silence them from having a commencement address. A pro-Israel student who wants to speak about the horrors of October 7th or defend Israel's response and its war in Gaza could be accused of making Palestinian or Muslim students unsafe or making them uncomfortable, and there could be threats from radical pro-Palestine activists that they could then cite as an excuse to cancel the talk. If you go down this path, if you enable this kind of behavior, just because it's this time targeted against the people with which you strongly disagree, you are undermining the protections that secure your own rights and your own liberties. And it's so short-sighted and so foolish. While some of the talk is about physical safety, a part of this has also been the conversation over emotional or mental safety, right? Do Jewish students have a right to feel safe and comfortable at commencement? The short answer is no. Nobody has a right to mental comfort or to be free from anything that might offend them. And no actual learning environment could ever exist where open dialogue or interesting debates ever occur with that kind of attitude embodied on a campus. So anybody who believes in free speech and has spoken out against the culture and atmosphere of left-wing crazy censorship on campus should be equally outraged and making their voice heard about this incident as well. Some are, of course, like Barry Weiss and the Free Press, but some aren't. And for viewers, that's instructive. Who really means the things they say, or who makes exceptions when it's people they really don't like or agree with. All right, sticking with the free speech topic today, we're going to talk about something that just went down overseas, featuring a conservative conference that was shut down by a local government. A little bit of a primer on this. You have an interesting debate happening on the American right and internationally, but especially on the American right, between conservatives who consider themselves classical liberals or conservatives in the traditional sense of limited government and the Constitution and free markets and that kind of thing. And a new faction, empowered by the rise of Trump, of self-described populist nationalist conservatives. These people want to use the force of government to enforce their morality, in some cases openly advocating for using the government to push religious ideas and religious values on people, and they don't believe in the same kind of limited government or pluralism or tolerance that traditional classical liberals and classical conservatives in the classical liberal mold have always defended and upheld. In particular, they've argued that assertions of the common good should, in many cases, overpower claims of individual rights. But that seems to be exactly what's just happened to them, and they don't seem to like it very much. The Associated Press reports that on Tuesday, Belgian police shut down a gathering of far-right politicians and supporters, citing concerns about public order, while attendees protested curbs on free speech and vowed to find another venue for the second day of their meeting. The annual National Conservative Conference, held this year in Brussels, comes ahead of Europe-wide elections. As campaigning for the June 6 to 9 event heats up, mainstream parties fear that disenfranchised voters might turn to the people at NatCon 2024. Belgian police shut down the conference by barring attendees from re-entering the venue if they dared to leave. A dozen or so officers blocked the main entrance. It was the third venue selected for the gathering after the owners of two other locations shied away when anti-fascist protesters vowed to disrupt proceedings. This year's NatCon, organized by the conservative U.S. think tank, the Edmund Burke Foundation, was held under the banner of national conservatism, preserving the nation-state in Europe. The UK politician Nigel Farage put out a statement decrying this act of censorship on X. Take a look at that video.
Farage, what is your action?
I hadn't expected to be welcomed exactly with open arms by this community, but what happened today was truly extraordinary. Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage was the keynote speaker at the event, and he was on stage as police arrived to try and close it down.
The police are outside the door as I speak. They will not let anybody else in. You know, I've experienced cancel culture personally here. I've had, restaurants wouldn't serve me in Brussels in my last days as an MEP, coffee bars, even the pub I used to use, so I couldn't go there anymore. And we give huge thanks to the Tunisian owner of this business for his courage in allowing free speech to take place. But what is happening as we speak is he is receiving phone calls from the local mayor. The police are being encouraged to come in and shut down this conference. They have an order to close down this event, and when more police gather, that's exactly what they'll do. No alternative opinion allowed. This is the updated new form of communism.
So thankfully, from the perspective of those that believe in free speech and open debate, the classical liberals that these types like to revile so much, the event has actually been allowed to proceed. Euronews reports a court allows nationalist gathering in Brussels to proceed, organizers say. The first day of the NatCon meeting of hard-right European nationalists was disrupted when police moved in to try and shut it down. But the highest court in Brussels has allowed a gathering of far-right European nationalist politicians to continue for a second day, the conference organizers say, after police tried to shut it down on Tuesday. So I want to talk about this story for a couple of reasons. One is that I cover free speech and I speak out against censorship wherever it happens, and no matter who the victims are, whether I agree with them or whether I totally disagree with them. In this case, it's people on the right with whom I have huge ideological disagreements and have clashed and debated with repeatedly. But I still completely support their right to free speech, and I'm glad that this was allowed to go forward, even though I'm sure I would have objected to much of what was said at the conference. I'm really glad that they ultimately weren't censored. However, I hope that some of them can see this as something of a wake-up call. Because what many, although not all, nationalist conservatives have openly advocated for is allowing a more muscular government to exercise control and censorship, especially at the local level, over controversial things like obscenity or like pornography or like unpatriotic speech or hate speech that offends them on their special subjects that they care about. These kinds of things. This is very inherent to the entire argument about what distinguishes a NatCon, a nationalist conservative, from a classical liberal conservative, is that the NatCons say we should use the government to assert the common good, and that can sometimes trump individual rights, that those foolish libertarian conservatives are so ideologically committed to in this dogmatic fashion that they routinely decry. Well, how is what happened in Brussels not exactly what they advocate for? They hold a minority viewpoint in that area, and the local government used muscular force to assert the common good over the individual rights of the people who were causing public disruption and controversy. Now, of course, I don't believe in that, so I disagree with that. But although the targeting and the values at stake are different, in principle, in kind, the action isn't really meaningfully different from what they want to do to their ideological opponents at the local level in the US, for example, under their vision for nationalist conservatism. But now, of course, when they're a victim of it, it's an outrage and they really don't like it. Of course, what people like me have always tried to explain to these types is that you can't have it just one way. If the government is allowed to assert the common good over individual rights, well, that's not just going to be allowed when it's you in charge of the government or people that share your values. It's also something that the government's going to get to do when it's not your types, when it's the other side that has power, and that's not going to work out so great for you. It was heartening to see a wide coalition of free market-oriented, classical liberal, and libertarian types on the right come out and sign a letter denouncing the act of censorship and saying that even though they regularly spar with and disagree with the nationalists, that of course they have a right to free speech and they should be allowed to hold their conference. I was glad to join in those calls, and I'll always do so on this show and elsewhere. Of course, they wouldn't defend our rights, but that's kind of the point. That's kind of the distinction between the two camps. And these events really do put that clear distinction on display. What do you guys think? Are you more in the classical conservative or classical liberal mold, or are you one of these new nationalist conservatives? Let me know in the comments below. All right, up next, in a new segment I'm calling DELULU Epidemic, we're going to be spotlighting the most delusional takes that I come across on the internet. Today, we've got MSNBC, which just dropped an article complaining about the lack of racial diversity in the MLB, Major League Baseball. The headline reads, "The decline of black players in MLB should be a warning about the war on DEI," referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Their caption says, "The number of black American players in Major League Baseball has plummeted to just 6%, offering a warning about what can happen when institutions de-emphasize diversity." Whew, boy, there are so many problems with this, I hardly know where to begin. First, according to the MLB's own data, it's actually one of the most diverse professional sports leagues in America. According to MLB.com, as of opening day, MLB rosters remained among the most diverse in all of professional sports, with 40.34% of overall rosters, including the injured list, suspension, and restricted lists, coming from diverse backgrounds, a 2.3% increase from a year earlier. This included 945 players overall, 59 black players, 6.2%, 285 Latino players, 30.2%, 30 Asian players, 6 Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian players, and 2 Native American players. So it's honestly galling how misleading this MSNBC article is. They took that 6% number of black athletes in the MLB, which is lower than it used to be, it has gone down, and they stripped it of the context that the MLB is more than 40% diverse and has increased in overall diversity, and just reported that the number of black baseball players has gone down, devoid of the context that overall diversity is going up, and attributed it to some nebulous war against diversity, which is also very strange because, as far as I can tell, the MLB is still fully committed to diversity efforts. It's not run by Republicans who are anti-woke, who are rolling back all the DEI initiatives or anything like that. And the entire premise of this is all flawed. It rests on the assumption that all races should be represented equal to population in a given professional sports league. But that doesn't actually make any sense because people of different races play sports at different rates. So you wouldn't expect it to perfectly mirror the demographics of the US. A great example of this is the NBA, which is like 70% black. Nobody would say that the NBA is racist against whites or that it has de-emphasized diversity. No, just black people play basketball a lot more at the youth level and at the cultural level, and so more superstars emerge from their ranks. And I think it's probably true that more white people play baseball at the grassroots level in America than do black people. So you might have a little bit lower percentage of black athletes coming through the ranks than you do of some other groups. But for example, Hispanic groups seem to be overrepresented relative to population because that sport is more popular. Again, it doesn't mean the MLB is racist against whites and biased towards Hispanic people. It just means that groups have different outcomes sometimes, and it's not always evidence of bias or discrimination. When I see stuff like this, it just screams of race baiting, of outrage mongering, of oppression Olympics attempts to always reach and find some new victim status or narrative to spin. So MSNBC, your DELULU is showing. All right, guys, now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my segment where I take on the craziest and cringiest videos from the Clock app. And today, it's a topic near and dear to my heart that I've personally struggled with from my earliest days, the topic of pretty privilege. Buckle up and get ready to learn about pretty privilege with me from this TikToker, and spoiler alert, there's a real twist at the end.
Today I'm going to explain pretty privilege because yes, I do experience pretty privilege, but there are tiers to pretty privilege and I'm on the lower tier.
Is she calling herself not that pretty? I think she's pretty. I don't think she's in the lowest tier of pretty privilege. That seems harsh. Of course, I'm speaking from the top tier, so
pretty privilege has 3 tiers. There's entry level, 8 tier, and model status. So entry level pretty privilege includes all the girls that are a little bit above average looking, but they're not like the prettiest girls you've ever seen, but you would definitely consider them pretty. Being on this level gets you some privileges, like you can get free drinks at a bar, people want to help you if you're in need, People are generally nice to you. They give you the benefit of the doubt. And this is the category that I would put myself in. And to put this on the 1 through 10 scale, this would be the high 6s and the 7s. You're pretty enough to be treated well because of it, but you're not pretty enough to make a lifestyle out of it. So one level above that is what I call 8 tier, and that's your 8s of the world. And these girls are generally the prettiest girls in the room. They're the prettiest girls you see in real life on an average day. And these are the girls that draw attention because of how pretty they are. When you're on this level, you get all the privileges of entry level, but multiplied. Instead of being able to access benefits, you're getting offered benefits. So people will give you free drinks without even talking to you. People will give you free food. People will just give you free things, honestly. People flock around you. Either girls really want to be your friend or they're very jealous of you and they hate on you, and boys are very obsessed with you. You have the halo effect, which is where people think highly of you just because of the way that you look. It's not based on merit, but people will just think that you're nicer, you're funnier, you're smarter, all because of the way that you look. These girls are immediately likable because of how pretty they are, and they experience the world differently than everybody else does.
So I want to stop because I have a couple points and questions. One, where did these tiers come from? Did she just make them up, or is this the kind of thing they're teaching in college these days? And two, I think she might be overstating the degree of privilege that an 8 would have in our society. Don't get me wrong. I think this is a real thing. I don't think this is made up out of whole cloth. I think it's obvious, and I think it's actually demonstrable that we tend to view people more positively if they're better looking and just treat them a little bit differently. But is it really as extreme as she's saying? Let me know in the comments, because I also think this applies more to women than men. Are people really just constantly offering you free stuff if you're a beautiful woman? Just constantly? I don't know. I obviously have never walked in those shoes, so I can't speak to it, but I'm a little skeptical that it's really that extreme as she's making it out to be.
And the final pretty privilege tier is model status. And that's going to be your 9s and 10s.
All right, we've come to my tier.
These are going to be the people that you almost never see in real life. These are the people that you see on social media, that you see on your TV. These are models, these are celebrities, these are influencers. These people make a living off of how pretty they are. They have the halo effect times 1,000, and people want to do things for them just because of how pretty they are. They can get almost anything for free. They can get anywhere for free. They can get into the upper echelon of society just because of the way that they look. Now, why did I just explain all this? Because people like to comment on my videos saying, oh, the reason that happened to you, the reason that you got this thing, the reason that people were nice to you was pretty privilege. It has nothing to do with you and what you did. It's all about the way that you look. And while pretty privilege gets my foot in the door, I've learned how to maximize my pretty privilege by being socially adept and by surrounding myself with people that are prettier than me. Being an entry-level pretty privilege doesn't automatically mean that people are going to give me things or be nice to me because of the way that I look. But it does mean that because of the way that I look, I have the ability to manipulate them in specific ways to get a certain outcome and to get the things that I want from them. It's not a given, but being pretty is a tool that I can use to my advantage. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you don't know me, I'm Vic and I'm a diagnosed psychopath, and I talk about being a psychopath on my page, so if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and follow along, and thanks for watching.
Excuse me? That came out of nowhere. She's like, by the way, I'm a diagnosed psychopath, and I talk about it on my page. That is interesting. Kudos for transparency, and I might have to check out some more of her videos for future segments, because that could be interesting. But I do want to talk more deeply about this for a second, because while I think there's a grain of truth to this video and to this notion of pretty privilege, by the way, guys, I'm joking about me being a 10 or whatever. I think I'm a decent looking, but I'm not that conceited. I'm joking, okay? I think there's a grain of truth to this narrative. Life is definitely easier if you're just easy on the eyes. People, I think, do subconsciously like you more or treat you better. That is a true thing. But I think she's overstating the extent of this, and I think she's also misrepresenting prettiness or attractiveness as if it's like skin color or eye color or something that's just set and totally out of your control. Some people are just born naturally kind of ugly, and some people are just naturally born beautiful. But a lot of attractiveness is a product of what people put in and get out of things. Are they really fit? I mean, being healthy and thin and fit and lean even changes your facial structure and makes you look differently in ways that make you more visual visually appealing. It's not just your body. Do you present yourself well? Are you well groomed? All of these things. It's not just some completely set in stone, arbitrary happenstance and circumstance of your birth. It is a variable that you can, to some extent, modify. So in that sense, it's not really this unearned privilege. At least it's more complicated than that. So I think the entire narrative, it misses that. It oversimplifies things. That said, like with the other arguments you hear about privilege from the kind of social justice online crowd, it's not that they're totally without merit. It's not that there's no forms of privilege in society. Of course there are. It's that their viewpoint seems to flatten the world into very simple categories where everyone is privileged or oppressed based on just a few boxes. In reality, individuals are incredibly complex. And when they do this kind of analysis that just looks at a couple of boxes, it totally misses the picture. Somebody might be a white, straight man, and at first glance, the boxes they check on the census, they're privileged. But little do you know, they've got serious mental health issues, they're a survivor of acute childhood trauma, or they have struggled with an autoimmune disorder, or there's so many things. And the truth is that privilege versus non-privilege or the lack of privilege is an incredibly complex equation with literally thousands of inputs. So even seeing a pretty person doesn't mean they're privileged. They could have the hardest life you've ever known. And all of these ideologies and activist trends, they seem to really oversimplify things and just try to condense things down to a few identity boxes they can check off and try to see the world in this oppressors versus oppressed dynamic that they love so much, that suits their ideological prior values and outlook. And so they just stick to it. They cling to it. But it's a black and white way of viewing the world. And like most black and white frameworks, it misses the many, many shades of gray. What do you think, though? Do you personally struggle with pretty privilege like I do? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear from y'all. And don't forget to like and do consider subscribing as well. Now, before we go, I want to read a couple of comments and respond to what you guys had to say about the last episode. One person said, the fat acceptance mindset lacks nuance. Many overweight people have had a rocky relationship with food, and the fat acceptance movement is partly to keep them from engaging in disordered eating behaviors. However, there's a fine line between having a little extra body fat or accepting that your stomach won't be flat because you have organs and straight up glorifying obesity. I just wish there was a nuanced influencer. I actually completely agree with this, and I've said for a long time that I think the origins or the grain of truth in the body positive movement is both valid and important. Especially when I was growing up, like in the 2000s, we had these rail thin people that were often airbrushed and photoshopped, and we just projected this totally unreasonable body image that had girls thinking they were fat if they were a size 4 jeans. It is okay that not everybody has a six-pack or a flat stomach, and it's okay to have a little bit of stretch marks or curves or whatever. It's not, we don't all need to look like the airbrushed Abercrombie models that we compared ourselves to growing up. That piece of it is important, but the problem is the movement's morphed so far beyond that into straight up denying science and glorifying obesity at the same time that that's killing people in huge numbers. That said, I do acknowledge that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We shouldn't go back to the extreme body standards we used to have. We should just find a reasonable place in the middle. Up next, somebody said I'm reigniting the COVID riots for no Tuesday, Wednesday video. I'm sorry. I'm glad you enjoyed the show that much, but please don't riot. It was just a pre-scheduled work thing I had to go do, but I'll be back at it now today and Friday and heading into next week. Another person said, quote, this guy is a gay Jussie Smollett. I thought Jussie was already the gay Jussie. Am I confusing him for someone else? No, you're not. I was just wrong. I misspoke. I made an error when I was talking about that TikToker who faked a hate crime. I said he was the gay Jussie Smollett, but yes, Jussie Smollett is actually gay himself. So Jussie Smollett is the gay Jussie Smollett. So my bad on that one, guys. Another person said, DELULU, Brad, where do you get these terms? Cracks me up. Thanks. Well, I get them from TikTok and also from my sister who is younger and deep ensconced in Gen Z culture. And you know what? I crap on Gen Z sometimes, but I find their slang and humor pretty endearing and I like it. So sometimes I adopt a little bit of it. Another person said, gay men need to stop making trendy slang happen and start talking like adults. It trivializes complex political discussions. It is why we are constantly getting shut out of every conversation and movement about our own lives, our own experiences, and even our own sexuality. Sorry, babe, but it's a no from me. I don't take myself that seriously. I think I don't need to speak in stilted and over formal language all the time. It's okay to be casual and speak like an everyday person, because you know what? We are all everyday people. And I don't view myself as better than the random person on the street in their opinion. So I have no issue talking in language that everyday people use. And I don't think it actually makes me less serious or makes my ideas not taken seriously, at least not by people who I want to take them seriously. Maybe by some snobs out there in the world, they don't take me seriously because I say, babe, your DELULU is showing or whatever. But you know what? Those people, I don't have time for pretentiousness. I'm sorry, I just don't. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate all of you joining me in this new show and this journey. Please do comment with your thoughts, and I'll consider reading some of the comments on the next episode. Don't forget to hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. Maybe even turn on those bell notifications. And with that, I'll see you all tomorrow.